All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Grapevine Dormancy. This is lecture 4 for our Video 301 class. If you'd like to read along with where I got a lot of this material from, it's chapter 13 in General Viticulture and then chapter 9 in the Grape Grower's Handbook. Chapter 13 in the General Viticulture textbook covers mostly pruning methods, like calculations for pruning. So I didn't take too much from that, but if you'd like to dive deeper into that, that's referenced. And then chapter 9 is where I got the majority of this information from the Grape Grower's Handbook, and then I also did a little extra research on some questions I had along the way too. So yeah, let's just get into it. So it's winter right now for our class. Like, even though it's nice and sunny outside, we're still in February, so it's pretty cold. This is still the dormant cycle of grapevines and vineyards in the area. If you were in the southern hemisphere, it'd be completely different, right? They'd actually be gearing up for harvest soon, because they have complete opposite growing cycles of us. So northern hemisphere of the world, we're in dormancy, and southern hemisphere is getting ready for harvest. It's actually how a lot of students get lots of experience to build their resumes, is sometimes we'll have students hop different parts of the hemisphere to get the most harvest experience they can within a year, right? So you could do 2 harvests in a year if you wanted to. Anyways, so today we're going to talk about an introduction to dormancy, 3 stages of dormancy, principles of pruning, and that includes timing and balance, overcropping versus undercropping, and then also pruning methods as well. Cool. So an introduction to dormancy. So after harvest, right, after all the fruit's been harvested, the leaves will continue to form sugars, carbohydrates until temperatures drop or there's a frost. This stage will allow the vine to become more cold hardy, right? So during that stage, they're going to be converting sugars to starch and then store it in the roots and trunks of the vines. So this is really important. Vines will utilize these starches as reserves for the following season. It's really critical to the vine's ability when it wakes up again that it has some kind of reserves so it can produce that new growth at the very beginning of the following spring, right? So as the vine acclimates for cold weather and all the leaves drop off, no more carbohydrate accumulation occurs. And overall, there are 3 stages of grapevine dormancy. So there's acclimation, midwinter dormancy, and then deacclimation. So we'll cover that definitely much more thoroughly as we get through here. So step 1, or stage 1, acclimation. So this is right after harvest, and with parts of the fruit, there's still leaves on the vine. The leaves are still active, but their vine is transitioning for the cold hardy season, right? So definition, that'll be on your quizzes. The period of transition from non-hardy to fully hardy grapevines for the dormant winter season, right? So like I kind of briefly mentioned in the previous slide, it's ideal for vines to still have leaves on the vine for a period of time before freezing temperatures, right? We want those leaves still alive and present because they need to produce those sugars to create the reserves for winter, right? So this is extremely important so that the vine can also acclimate to cooler temperatures before the freeze. As temperatures drop and daylight hours shorten, the grapevines begin to shut down photosynthesis processing, and this will also create like a decrease in or death of cells in the vines, right, in the leaves. So chlorophyll will start to break down, and that's why we get this decrease in yellow color and more of this browning, where eventually the leaves fall off. If the vine is exposed to extreme temperature swings or extreme frost a lot earlier than it's expected, it could kill the leaves and cause what's called early leaf fall. And early leaf fall is not ideal because you're not going to have that time for the vine to adjust properly, and you're not going to build those carbohydrate reserves after harvest, right? So that's not ideal. That can happen due to heavy crops. So if you overcropped and the vine is just going through extreme stress, that can cause early leaf fall. Defoliation from pests, you have some kind of like a dust mite or something comes through there and just ravages your leaves. If you don't have leaves, you don't have photosynthesis, and then the leaves just fall off, right? Overall, just stress and disease can cause early leaf fall too. So here's a nice picture here. Leaves turn from bright green to golden during pre-dormancy, and then frost and cold weather eventually stops photosynthesis. Definitely important to note that the factors that cause the vine to know that it's time to go into dormant season is temperature and then daylight hours too, right? So vines respond to their, plants just in general respond to their environment, whether it's how long the sun is out, overall temperature of the soil, moisture. These are all ways that vines or plants interact with the environment, and they know what's going on. It signals what happens to their metabolism, what they should be doing at certain times. So, unlike humans where we build shelters and other things, that's how plants respond to their environment. Okay, so as we mentioned, we know that we're kind of acclimating to dormancy. During this time, all of those sugars that were produced to be stored, it's a conversion of glucose into starch, right? So why do plants convert sugars into starch during dormancy? And it's actually kind of an interesting situation. It's a very strategic chemical strategy. So it benefits the plant in a couple different ways. One is solubility. So starch is insoluble in water, so it won't disrupt the cell's water balance when stored in large quantities. This kind of helps, whereas we're going to talk about freezing. Like water expands when it freezes, right? So this is going to help keep the cell in an environment where it's not going to have to expand and potentially break, right, during freezing times. Space efficiency, starches are highly packed together. They're units of glucose packed together, like you see in this image here. So this allows plants to store a large amount of energy in a very small space. And then also controlled release. Glucose is very reactive. It's the single unit that we use to consume and create energy right away. So think of it as something that's like very flammable, right? Like it's very reactive. We take it up immediately and burn it. Starch, we have to break down those units, so it allows for a gradual release of energy rather than a huge flow of energy, and that's created through like enzymatic processes, right? So we have solubility, space efficiency, and then also controlled release. As the vine starts to wake up in the spring, it can take from those reserves and have a slow release of energy and take slowly from that bank, right? So that is why not just grapevines, but any plant that goes through dormancy will convert their sugars into starch. So very strategic and kind of interesting too. I did include fructose and sucrose in here just for your learning pleasure. The plants do produce glucose and fructose. Starch is just comprised of glucose molecules. Okay, so how buds prepare for dormancy. So we talked about how we store that energy post-harvest and then put it into the trunk and roots of the grapevine by converting it to starch, right? So now we're talking about how the buds on the canes prepare themselves for dormancy. And this is really important because those buds are going to be next year's crop, right? So those buds form the previous season. We have to make sure that they go cold hardy over the winter so that way our crop for next summer and fall is healthy, because the whole business is determined on how well this crop is, right? Because we're farmers. So I have a really interesting article from Cornell, how grapevine buds gain and lose cold hardiness. So if you'd like to read about that, you're welcome to check out that link. So basically there's two methods for how grapevine buds prepare for dormancy. Okay, so one of those methods is called dehydration, and this is really smart move because, as we talked about earlier, water expands as it freezes, right? If you ever left a full water bottle in your freezer or like something else and it exploded all over the place, it's a cruel way of learning that water expands as it freezes. So it'll actually break those cells and kill them. So the bud will purposefully dehydrate it. It'll remove a lot of water, most all the water from the cell to the intercellular spaces, so the spaces between cells. It'll combine with sugar and proteins to form something called a cryoprotectant, so freezing protectant. And because that water is bound to sugar and proteins, it actually lowers the freezing point of the solution. So this effectively becomes a process called supercooling. So the lowering of the freezing point allows the cells to supercool without the formation of ice crystals. So ice crystals are the part that expand that would damage the cells. So the two methods for cold hardiness are dehydration and supercooling. I definitely want you to remember cryoprotectants and why they lower the freezing point of the bud. Here's a cool picture of a cross section for you guys. This is just literally a grapevine bud that was cut right down the center, so you can kind of see the structure. We have the primary bud. This is what will be the entire growth of the shoot with their clusters and leaves and everything for the following season. If something were to happen, we do have a secondary and tertiary bud. These are like the grapevine's insurance policies for crop and growth, but also vine's first priority is to reproduce, right? So that's not really for us as farmers. It's more for the vine's ability to produce fruit and spread its seed and create offspring, right? This fuzzy stuff in here has been referred to as tomentum. It's also similar structure. It's under the fuzzy part underneath a leaf. Okay, moving on. So that brings us on to stage 2 of our midwinter dormancy. So this, not super exciting in this part. This is the period of most severe cold weather. It's the time of greatest cold hardiness in vines. So grapevines, if they have properly prepared for dormancy, can withstand temperatures of negative 20 degrees, depending on the variety, right? And the cold hardiness of the buds is consistent during this time, so you don't have to worry about snow or ice or rain or freezing. If this is the coldest time of the winter, you don't have to worry about the vines because they're completely dormant at this phase. However, when you do need to start worrying is if the temperature is so sporadic that you've been given warm weeks, borderline hot weeks, and then all of a sudden the temperature drops and freezes again. The plants become very confused because they rely on temperature and sunlight, right? So if it's January and it's 65 degrees outside and it's sunny and it's that temperature consistently for 2 weeks, the vines are thinking, hey, it's spring. It's time to start losing our cold hardiness, and it's time to start softening up and getting ready for new growth. And then all of a sudden February hits and we're just slammed with another cold season, super cold, rainy. That's when you need to be concerned, and that's when you are at high risk of damage for your vines. So we talked last presentation about frost protective measures. That is the time that we employ those methods. So those helicopters, those heaters, the overhead sprinklers, that's when that happens, is when you have those problems, which have been more and more common with climate change and just drastic temperatures altogether, right? So, yeah, something to think about. Okay, stage 3 is deacclimation. This happens when temperatures reach above 32 degrees. It depends on the variety, right? So overall, it happens when it gets warmer and there's more sunlight outside, right? So those plants are responding to light and temperature. So this actually happens faster than acclimation, so which makes it so tricky, right? So acclimation, it takes much longer for the vine to fall to sleep to dormancy than it does to wake up from dormancy. And again, soil temperature, air temperature, and daylight affect this. The vine's ability to wake up from dormancy and grow new leaves and shoots are completely dependent on those starch storages, right? Those carbohydrate storages. So if you are a vineyard owner, grapevine grower, there are a couple ways to test for carbohydrate storage if you're interested. I mean, I think a lot of wineries or vineyards just go off of troubleshooting and taking notes about their storages. I know there are a handful of wineries that believe in irrigating post-harvest and giving those vines a chance to continue their growth before shutting down. There's mixed reviews on that, right? The Australian Table Grape Association had a couple of really good processes for measuring carbohydrate storage. One was the iodine test, which you can just buy some, it's a 1% iodine solution from your local pharmacy, and then you can take a little piece of wood, cross-section, and you can put some iodine on it. The iodine will interact with starch only, and it will turn black. And this is this is qualitative, not quantitative. So this means that it only tells you if starch is present. It doesn't tell you how much, right? If you wanted to know how much, you'd have to send some samples to a lab. You can look more into that if you'd like to for your own personal use through this website here. But I thought that was interesting. Okay, so those are the 3 major stages of grapevine dormancy. Next, we're going to move into the principles of grapevine pruning, which is something that happens during the late winter / early spring. If you prune, depending on when you prune, it can be up to you, right? So the big things I want you guys to remember is that pruning is a method used to control your grape production, like the quantity of grapes that you produce, like your crop load, right? But it also can limit the vegetal growth of the vine. So those are the 2 things that are always in balance: your fruit load versus the vegetative growth of the vines or the greenery, right? So the goal is to have a balance between the fruit and the vine, right? And also think of it as the grapevine can only produce so much carbohydrates to sustain itself every season. So depending on the variety that you have, the rootstocks you have, how vigorous your vineyard is, it's a dance with nature, and it takes a lot of experience and time to understand that perfect balance for you. Like, you can go to the Central Valley where they're producing, 15 tons per acre, just for example. There could be vineyards that are producing 15 tons per acre as Zinfandel, and then you get to, your property, and maybe it's a different soil type, different rootstock. Maybe what works best for your vines is 5 tons per acre. It just really depends on what you have. So you just really need to look at your own situation and work with what you have. So it's hard. Okay, so balance, right? Here's kind of how the scales tip. Vines that produce heavy crops grow less vigorously than those with lighter crop loads. So if you have more fruit, the vine won't be able to grow itself, right? That's a trade-off. You're heavy on fruit, less on the vegetative, less on the vine growth, which can be not helpful if you want to establish deep roots and long-living vines, right? You have to be a balance. Less vigorous vines can hold back potential root growth and health of the vine, we just mentioned. Overcropping vines can lead to poor quality wines, right? So if you have too much fruit, the vine won't be able to produce enough sugar and develop that fruit all the way. It'll feel really like watered down, and it just won't have any flavor, right? Also, the less shoots left behind, the more rapidly each shoot will grow. So if you try to trim it back, the shoots will grow much faster because all those carbohydrates still get applied, and then they grow just at a faster rate. If you want to find an indication for vigor for your grapevine, the diameter, like the girth of the cane, will indicate the vigor of your vine. So, which would lead to more fruit growth than smaller diameter canes, right? So they're just proportional. The bigger the cane, the more fruit it will produce. The smaller the cane, the less vigorous it is, right? So if you have an option for keeping certain canes during pruning, you most likely want to keep the larger one because it has the best ability to be healthier through the growing season. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Cool. So overall for pruning, as vines begin to go dormant, shoots lignify and become canes. Leaves will drop off completely at this stage. Your pruning style will depend a lot on the grape type, the variety that you have, your ability of labor, your ability to fork up money for these costs, right? Your production goal, but also disease pressure as well. There's a lot of different types of pruning. Mostly what we see here in the Sierra foothills is hand pruning, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. But there's double pruning and then single pruning. So double pruning, it helps spread out your labor and make your work less strenuous. So there's an early trim, either by hand or via machine. And this is winter. So this is the box machine going through and just trimming off about a foot or to a foot and a half above the spurs here. So just taking off all that extra growth, doing like an initial trim. And then the second prune will happen later winter or early spring, and that's when they go through and they'll do like the fine cutting, like you see in this corner down here. So they'll go through and they'll clean it up, and they'll take it back to the spurs. Single pruning is the opposite of that. So instead of going through twice, you just do it all at once, and then you're good to go. This can be risky if you do it too early, if you're worried about disease or eutypa. You just want to do it before there's any like rain. If you have a risk of rain, it can cause those spores to get in, and that can be an issue, right? Okay. Timing of pruning. So vines can be pruned anywhere between leaf fall and bud break, technically speaking. If you're going to prune early winter, you do risk infection if it's a wet winter. Like I said, the water will cause the dispersal of spores, and that's how they get into vines, and they can enter through the xylem and phloem and then start to spread from the inside. If you prune late winter, early springs, it can allow adjustments in bud number in the event of winter injury, right? So if some of those buds were injured during winter, you can trim off those buds and keep the good ones, right, that are healthy. If you do it too late, right, it can delay bud break for several days or even weeks, but it could also help prevent early season frost damage as well. So the timing of your pruning just depends on your growing seasons. Shorter seasons would want to avoid delaying bud break, right? Because if you only have, a couple months to grow, you want those vines to start growing as soon as they can. If you have a really long growing season, it might benefit you from delaying bud break, or you have the ability to, right? A really good way to know that you aren't pruning too early is when you see sap flow. Sometimes vineyards will refer to this as like the vines are crying. That's a really good sign, because that means the vine is waking up and is starting to push water through the xylem again. So you're seeing this water come out, and when it's pushing outward like that, it's less susceptible to get disease, because disease would have to go against the flow of water that's pushing through that. So that's a really good sign. Okay. If you want to achieve balanced pruning, they say that the best way to determine vigor is that the vine should be roughly pencil sized. And I have seen vines that are larger than this that have been okay. I think it just depends on your variety. This is what the textbook recommended, is pencil sized. I think it really just is up to you. I think you could do double this if you really needed to, or maybe just 1.5 this size. Anyways, if you have shoots that are too thin, it could be a sign that there were too many buds left behind in the previous season, right? So think about the vine produces so much carbohydrates. If you have so much buds, it has to share all that growth with all those buds, and you spread it out too thin, and that's why you have spindly, too skinny shoots, right? So it's going to have a hard time distributing all the energy. It's going to be spread too thin. So that's why you're going to have skinny, spindly shoots. If you have thick, over-vigorous shoots, like they're the size of my chapstick, or the size of your thumb, then they recommend you should leave behind more buds the next season, because that's over-vigorous. That's too much growth. So it's always a combination, a balance of fruit yield, fruit quality, and vegetative growth. And there's another link here from Cornell if you would like to see that article. Okay, so that kind of hopefully gives you an idea about the position of the shoots and the size of the shoots / canes, and what is a good sign of what's over vigorous and under vigorous, right, depending on the diameter of the shoot / cane. Now comes kind of the topic of overcropping versus undercropping. So how would you know if you overcropped versus undercropped, right? So let's talk about that. if you have left too many buds after pruning, it's really hard for the vine to fully ripen all those clusters, right? So symptoms would include reduced sugar accumulation, also a delayed harvest. So if you are producing something and you're having a really hard time getting it to 24 bricks or whatever your desired goal is for sugar content, that is a symptom of overcropping. Reduced pigmentation in berry skin, right? So if it's not developing the colors you need in the skins, that could also be overcropping. And then also unbalanced fruit flavors in the wine. So if you have really hot weather, it could make flat wines with no acidity. And then if you have really cool weather, it could make really high acid wines but no sugar. So you have high acid, low alcohol, and then you'll have no acid and also wines with no character, right? So shoots of overcropped vines can die back to mature wood or one or two of the basal nodes. Long-term effects is it will reduce the vigor of your vine and the size of your vine, right? So it's giving all of its energy to producing fruit, and the vine isn't able to take care of itself anymore. This could be really bad for the longevity of your vines. If you're looking to invest in a long-living vineyard, that's going to be very harmful to your vines. Crop and vegetative growth the following year is significantly reduced if no starch reserves are saved because of overcropping. So again, the vine gave everything to the fruit and it wasn't able to give any reserves to itself during the dormant season. And then it affects the following season's quality or ability to go through bud break and establish a whole new set of fruit, right? So overcropping is definitely not sustainable and doesn't produce quality fruit. So it doesn't help you. Undercropping. So undercropping is the exact opposite of this. So there's too few buds, resulting in way more energy going towards the canopy and the vegetative side at the expense of fruit production. Okay, so excessive vegetative growth can show itself in the form of really large canopies. So all of that energy is going to the vine, and it hinders the grape development because there's just so much shade at this point now, right? So if your grapes are getting too much shade, here are some of the symptoms or consequences that can create, right? So you have elevated potassium, pH, and titratable acidity levels, reduced phenols, pigmentation, varietal flavor, and soluble concentration. So that's, just the color of the skins and also just flavor of the variety. Like you're not getting any of the notes that you would typically get. It's just really blah fruit, right? It can also impart vegetal flavors in the fruit and wine. So like especially if you grow like Cab or Sauvignon Blanc, right? So these are wines that can have a vegetal characteristic. It'll just make it even worse. It'll bring out that vegetal character even more. And then also shaded clusters and leaves are more susceptible to diseases, right? Because they don't get that airflow. It becomes very humid and very damp inside that canopy from all of that vegetative growth, right? So photo A will show a good balance of fruit and vegetative growth. This looks fantastic. The berries are exposed to sun and very nice airflow. Photo B shows this is just becoming a forest and we can't even see the fruit anymore. So it's out of balance. Pruning styles. Most common are the two bud spurs on bilateral cordons. So this is where you see this like T shape. A lot of vineyards in the Sierra foothills, just California in general, are this is a bilateral cordon with spur pruning, right? So spur pruning is when they leave behind a couple of buds from a permanent position. This is fast and easy to prune, and it's suitable for warmer climates. There's lower disease pressure, because there's very nice spacing here, right? These are the spurs that we see here, and they have two buds on them, which is why they call them two bud spurs. As compared to cane pruning, which is where we leave behind a whole cane, and the fruiting positions will grow just off of that. So this has it can be less work, has less shoot thinning passes required during the year, and will minimize your disease pest pressure, right? So a little article for you guys that like some extra reading there. For the pruning styles, there's a 2-step rule. Generally, you cut back the section with the like most growth here, right? So this is like the second year growth. And we want to leave 2 buds, right? So we'll cut back this, and then we'll leave these two buds here. And it will look like this after you cut it off. We'll do a pruning demonstration for you guys at Boger. They've actually left a couple of rows for us to practice on if you guys would like to come and do that with me. I'll post about that soon. Okay, so we're going to have an example of cane pruning versus spur pruning, right? So here we have, this is what's called quads. You'll see that there's 4 arms here. And then these are just the bilateral, so 2 arms on the side. And this is going to be a demo of cane versus spur pruning. So here we have the winter time. All of the leaves have fallen off the vine, and these are the canes that are left behind and what it looks like. So if you're going to do cane pruning, you're going to chop off basically all of this part of the cane, and then you're going to lay down one of the canes for the buds to come off of. For spur pruning, you're going to leave behind 2 positions on these spurs for new shoots to grow off of. So that's what it's going to look like after pruning and with some training. Next, you're going to see the buds start to develop from these new canes that were laid down. And then you'll see the buds developing off of the spurs from the mature older wood in the spring. And then in the summer, you'll see mature canopy, right? So these, again, this is the quads, and then this is a bilateral. And we'll go over more of this in my in-person demonstration too. Awesome. So that takes us to our learning objectives. Definitely follow this to prepare yourself for the quiz, as usual. If you guys have any questions, send me an email. But otherwise, thank you for your patience with me being sick and having to do this online. And I will look forward to seeing you guys next week or soon in person.